The autumn rain drummed steadily against the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Prince William sat in his study, reviewing the morning's correspondence. The golden leaves of the palace gardens swirled in the wind, creating a tapestry of amber and crimson against the gray October sky. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, entered quietly, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea and wearing the soft smile that had captured hearts worldwide for over a decade. "The children are finally settled with their tutors," she said, settling into the chair across from his mahogany desk. "George is working on his history project about the Battle of Hastings, Charlotte is practicing her French, and Louis is attempting to sit still long enough to learn basic arithmetic." William chuckled, accepting the tea gratefully. "At least one of them inherited your patience. I was terrible at sitting still at his age." He paused, glancing at the stack of official requests and invitations that seemed to grow larger each day. "Sometimes I wonder if we're giving them enough normalcy, Kate. All of this." He gestured around the ornate room with its portraits of long-dead monarchs and ceremonial artifacts. Catherine studied her husband's face, recognizing the familiar weight of responsibility that sometimes settled on his shoulders like an invisible crown. "They're good children, William. They understand their privileges, but they also understand kindness. That's what matters most." Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Sarah, one of their private secretaries, entered with a hesitant expression. "Your Royal Highnesses, I apologize for the interruption, but there's been an unusual request that I thought you might want to handle personally." William set down his tea. "What kind of request?" "It's from a social worker in Manchester. She's written on behalf of a family, the Hendersons. They have a 7-year-old daughter named Emily, who is battling leukemia. The treatment has been grueling, and the family has fallen behind on their mortgage payments. They're facing eviction next week." Sarah paused, her voice softening. The little girl apparently told her mother that her only wish before things get worse, is to meet a real princess. The room fell silent, except for the rain against the windows. Catherine felt her heart clench, thinking of Charlotte at 7 years old, full of life and dreams and endless questions about fairy tales. She looked at William, who was staring out at the garden, his jaw tight with emotion. "What's the family's situation exactly?" Catherine asked quietly. Sarah consulted her notes. "The father, David Henderson, lost his job 6 months ago when the factory where he worked closed down. He's been doing odd jobs, but it's not enough to cover the medical bills and mortgage. The mother, Lisa, has been caring for Emily full-time. They've exhausted their savings, sold everything of value, and the bank has issued a final notice. They have until Friday to pay $12,000 or they'll lose their home." William turned back from the window. "And the child's prognosis?" "The doctors are cautiously optimistic. The latest round of chemotherapy seems to be working, but she needs stability and a clean environment to recover properly. Losing their home now could be devastating for her health." Catherine stood and walked to the window, watching the rain cascade down the glass. She thought about her own children, safe and warm and surrounded by every comfort imaginable. She thought about the countless letters they received from families facing unimaginable challenges, most of which they could only acknowledge with formal responses and charitable donations to relevant organizations. "We could arrange a meeting," William said slowly. "Invite them to the palace for tea. It would mean the world to the little girl." "Yes," Catherine agreed, still looking out at the garden. "But—" William waited, knowing his wife's mind was working through something deeper. Catherine turned back to them, her green eyes bright with determination. "What if we did more than that?" "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "I mean, what if we helped them properly, not through official channels or charity announcements or public ceremonies? What if we just helped them, quietly, as people, not as royals?" William felt something stir in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea. This was why he had fallen in love with Catherine Middleton all those years ago at St. Andrews. Not for her beauty or grace, though she possessed both in abundance, but for her instinctive understanding of what really mattered. The mortgage payment, he said, understanding immediately, and more. Medical expenses, living costs while the father finds stable work, whatever they need to get back on their feet. Catherine sat back down, leaning forward earnestly. We could establish a small trust. Something private, no publicity, no photo opportunities, just a family helping another family. Sarah looked between them, clearly moved but also concerned. Your Royal Highnesses, the protocols for this kind of personal intervention are complex. There would need to be security clearances, financial audits, media management if it ever came to light. Then we manage it carefully, William said firmly. But we don't let protocols prevent us from doing what's right. Catherine reached for her phone. I want to call them myself, not through official channels. I want to speak to Emily's mother, parent to parent. Kate, William said gently, once we start down this path, there's no going back. If word gets out that we're personally intervening in individual cases, we'll be inundated with requests. The palace will worry about precedent, about security, about the constitutional implications of the future king and queen personally involving themselves in private matters. Catherine looked at him steadily. Are you saying we shouldn't help them? I'm saying we need to be sure we can see this through. Not just the financial help, but the emotional commitment. This won't be a one-time payment and then we move on. If Emily is going to recover, that family will need support through the entire process. Are we prepared for that? The question hung in the air between them. Outside, the rain was beginning to ease, and shafts of pale sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the autumn garden. Catherine thought about the weight of the crown that would one day rest on William's head and on hers. She thought about the distance that protocol and tradition placed between them and the people they would serve. She thought about little Emily Henderson, somewhere in Manchester, dreaming of meeting a princess while her parents struggled with impossible choices. Yes, she said finally. I think we are. William nodded slowly, then more firmly. Sarah, I want you to research the family thoroughly but discreetly. Full background checks, medical records, financial situation, everything. And I want absolute confidentiality on this. Not even the senior staff should know initially. Of course, sir. Shall I contact the social worker who wrote to us? I'll do that, Catherine said. But first, I want to know everything we can about Emily, her favorite colors, what she likes to do, what she's been learning in school. If we're going to help, we're going to do it right. After Sarah left, William and Catherine sat in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The afternoon sun was now streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the Persian carpet. Somewhere in the palace, they could hear the distant sound of their children's voices echoing down a corridor, full of life and laughter and the blessed ignorance of childhood. We'll need to visit them, Catherine said eventually. I know. Not a royal visit, a private one. We need to meet them properly, understand what they're really facing. William smiled at his wife, remembering why he had been so certain, even as a young man, that she would make an extraordinary queen. Not because she understood protocol or public speaking or the intricate dance of royal duties, but because she understood people, because she saw past the titles and ceremonies to the human heart of everything they did. When? He asked. Soon, this weekend if possible. We can drive up on Saturday morning, spend the day with them, and drive back Sunday. The children can stay with your father. They love Highgrove. And if we're recognized, if someone sees us? Catherine considered this. We'll be careful. Dress casually, take the unmarked car. If we're spotted, she shrugged. We'll say we were visiting friends in the area. which, in a way, we will be. The next few hours passed in a blur of quiet preparations. William made discreet calls to trusted members of their security detail, explaining that they would need minimal, invisible protection for a private trip to Manchester. Catherine spoke at length with Dr. Matthews, their family physician, about childhood leukemia and the support systems that families typically needed. By evening, they had a clearer picture of the Henderson family's situation. David Henderson had worked at a textile factory for 15 years before it closed, a victim of overseas competition and changing markets. Lisa Henderson had been a primary school teacher before Emily's diagnosis made it impossible for her to maintain regular employment. They had been a solid middle-class family until medical bills and unemployment had slowly eroded their savings. Emily herself was described by her social worker as a bright, imaginative child who loved drawing and reading. She had been particularly fascinated by stories about princesses and castles since beginning her treatment, finding comfort in tales of brave heroines overcoming impossible odds. Her current favorite book was a collection of fairy tales that she had read so many times the pages were falling out. "She sounds remarkable," Catherine said, reviewing the notes as she and William prepared for bed. "They all do. Hard-working people facing an impossible situation through no fault of their own." Catherine set the papers aside and looked at her husband. "Are you worried about this?" William considered the question carefully. "I'm worried about doing it wrong. I'm worried about raising hopes we can't fulfill. I'm worried about the precedent we're setting, and what it might mean for other families who need help just as desperately. But I'm more worried about what it would say about us if we didn't try. What would be the point of all this privilege, all this position, if we can't use it to help one little girl when we have the power to do so?" Catherine smiled and kissed his cheek. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." As they turned off the lights, both of them lay awake for a long time, thinking about Emily Henderson and her parents, about the weight of responsibility and the gift of opportunity, about the delicate balance between public duty and private compassion that would define their reigns. Neither of them could have predicted how profoundly this decision would change not only the Henderson family's life, but their own understanding of what it truly meant to serve. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely, and the stars were beginning to appear through the clearing clouds, bright and steady in the darkness, like points of hope against the vast mystery of the night. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, with frost glittering on the palace grounds like scattered diamonds. William loaded the last of the carefully chosen gifts into the back of their unmarked Range Rover, while Catherine made final adjustments to her appearance. She had chosen jeans, boots, and a simple wool sweater, clothes that any mother might wear on a weekend outing. Her wedding rings were the only hint of her true identity. "Ready?" William asked, sliding into the driver's seat. Their protection officers had already departed in a separate vehicle, with strict instructions to maintain distance and invisibility unless absolutely necessary. "I've been ready since we decided to do this," Catherine replied, settling into the passenger seat with a thermos of coffee and a folder containing everything they had learned about the Henderson family. The drive to Manchester took just over 4 hours, winding through the English countryside as autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and rust. They talked quietly about their children, about the upcoming week's engagements, about everything except the nervous anticipation that both of them felt. This was uncharted territory, a complete departure from the carefully choreographed royal visits that had structured their public lives for years. As they approached Manchester's outskirts, the scenery changed from rolling hills to urban sprawl. The Henderson family lived in Wythenshawe, a working-class area south of the city center. Their street, Maple Avenue, was lined with modest, semi-detached houses, many showing signs of the economic struggles that had affected the region for decades. "Number 43, Catherine said, checking the address as William slowed the car. The Henderson house was indistinguishable from its neighbors: red brick, small front garden, net curtains in the windows. What struck them both was how carefully maintained it was despite the family's financial struggles. The small lawn was neatly trimmed, the front door freshly painted in cheerful blue, and colorful curtains hung in what was obviously a child's bedroom window. William parked across the street, and they sat for a moment, both suddenly aware of the magnitude of what they were about to do. In 15 years of marriage, through countless official engagements and state functions, they had never undertaken anything quite like this. "Second thoughts?" Catherine asked softly. "No," William said, surprising himself with how certain he sounded. "You?" "Not one." Lisa Henderson answered their knock within seconds, as if she had been waiting by the door. She was younger than they had expected, perhaps early 30s, with tired eyes but a warm smile. Her hands trembled slightly as she invited them in. "I still can't quite believe you're here," she said, leading them through a narrow hallway into a small but immaculately clean sitting room. "Emily's been talking about nothing else since I told her yesterday. She hasn't slept much." The house told the story of a family trying to maintain dignity in desperate circumstances. The furniture was old but well cared for. Family photographs covered every available surface, and children's drawings decorated the refrigerator visible through the open kitchen door. What struck Catherine most was the absence of anything that suggested self-pity or defeat. This was a home filled with love, even as it faced destruction. "Where is Emily?" Catherine asked, settling onto the sofa where a worn but carefully folded blanket suggested someone had been sleeping there recently. "Upstairs with her dad. She's been getting ready for hours, changed her dress 3 times. Lisa's voice caught slightly. She's having a good day today. The new medication seems to be helping with the nausea." William leaned forward. "Mrs. Henderson, before we meet Emily, we want to talk to you about your situation. We know this isn't easy." Lisa's composure wavered. "The social worker said you might be able to arrange something. A meeting, maybe a signed photo. It would mean the world to Emily. She's been through so much and she's been so brave. If she could meet a real princess..." She stopped, unable to continue. "We're not here just to meet Emily," Catherine said gently. "We're here to help. Your family, your home, Emily's treatment. All of it." Lisa stared at them, uncomprehending. "I don't understand." "The mortgage payment that's due next week," William said quietly. "It's taken care of. The medical expenses, the living costs while your husband finds new work. We want to help with all of it." The color drained from Lisa's face. She looked between them as if they had spoken in a foreign language. "You can't... That's not... Why would you..." "Because Emily wants to meet a princess," Catherine said simply. "And because you're a family that shouldn't have to choose between keeping your home and fighting for your daughter's life." Lisa Henderson put her face in her hands and began to cry. Not the gentle tears of gratitude, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone who had been carrying an impossible weight for too long. Catherine moved to sit beside her, putting her arms around this stranger who no longer felt like a stranger at all. "I'm sorry," Lisa gasped. "I'm so sorry. I promised myself I wouldn't cry in front of you." "Don't apologize," Catherine said firmly. "You never need to apologize for feeling overwhelmed. We can't imagine what you've been going through." From upstairs came the sound of footsteps and a man's voice saying, "Mummy, are they here?" Lisa wiped her eyes quickly. "That's David and Emily." She stood, trying to compose herself. I need to tell them." "Why don't you bring them down?" William suggested. "We'll explain everything together." David Henderson appeared first, carrying Emily in his arms. He was a tall man with calloused hands and gentle eyes, clearly ill at ease but determined to be polite. Emily herself was tiny for 7, her bald head covered by a bright pink hat that she had clearly chosen with great care. But her eyes were bright with excitement and life and unmistakable hope. "Are you really a princess?" she asked Catherine without preamble, her voice slightly hoarse but filled with wonder. "I really am," Catherine replied, smiling. "And you must be Emily. I've heard so much about you." Emily wiggled to be put down, then approached Catherine with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "You're prettier than in the pictures," she announced, causing everyone in the room to laugh. "Why, thank you," Catherine said seriously. "And I love your hat. Pink is one of my favorite colors. It's to hide where my hair fell out, but Mummy says it's growing back." Emily touched the hat self-consciously. "Do you want to see my drawings? I drew you a picture." "I would love to see your drawings, but first, can you sit with me for a minute? I want to talk to you and your mummy and daddy about something very important." Emily climbed onto the sofa beside Catherine, her small frame dwarfed by the cushions. David sat on the edge of an armchair, still holding his wife's hand, both of them watching their daughter with expressions of fierce protectiveness mixed with bewildered hope. "Emily," Catherine said, "do you know why your mummy and daddy have been worried lately?" Emily nodded solemnly. "Because I got sick, and the medicine costs a lot of money, and Daddy can't work at the factory anymore because it closed down. Mummy thinks I don't know, but I heard them talking at night." She looked at her parents with understanding far beyond her years. "They think we might have to move to a smaller house." Catherine felt her heart clench. "How do you feel about that?" "I don't want to move," Emily said simply. "This is where all my things are, and if we move far away, Dr. Sarah might not be able to take care of me anymore." She paused thoughtfully. "But Mummy and Daddy work really hard, so if we have to move, it will be okay." William cleared his throat. "Emily, what if I told you that you didn't have to move? What if your family could stay in this house and you could keep seeing Dr. Sarah, and your parents didn't have to worry about money for your medicine?" Emily looked at him with the direct gaze that only children possess. "Is that possible?" "It is now," William said softly. David Henderson stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "I don't understand what's happening here," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "People like you don't just show up and solve people like us. This doesn't happen in real life." "Dad?" Emily said, confused by the tension in his voice. William rose and joined David at the window. "You're right," he said quietly. "This isn't how things usually work. But sometimes when you have the ability to help and you meet people who deserve that help, you realize that your position means nothing if you don't use it for something good." David turned to face him, tears streaming down his face. "Do you understand what you're offering us? It's not just money. It's Emily's life. It's our future. It's everything." "We understand," William said simply. "That's exactly why we're here." The next few hours passed in a blur of emotions and practical arrangements. William made quiet phone calls to set the financial support in motion, while Catherine sat with Emily, looking at her drawings and hearing about her favorite books and her plans for when she felt better. Lisa busied herself making tea and sandwiches, still seeming stunned by the sudden reversal of their fortunes. Emily had drawn dozens of pictures during her treatment: fairy tale castles, princesses in flowing gowns, brave knights fighting dragons, but the picture she had drawn specifically for Catherine was different. It showed a small house with a family standing in front of it: a mother, father, and little girl with a pink hat. Above them, the sky was full of stars, and one star was much brighter than the others. "That's the wishing star," Emily explained, pointing to the bright star. "I wished on it every night that we could stay in our house, and that I would get better and maybe someday meet a real princess." She looked up at Catherine with shining eyes. "I think it worked." Catherine felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I think it did too. As the afternoon wore on, they learned more about the Henderson family's story. David had been a foreman at the textile factory, well respected and steadily employed until the closure. Lisa had loved teaching and hoped to return to it once Emily's treatment was complete. They were people who had played by all the rules, worked hard, saved what they could, and still found themselves overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control. The hardest part, Lisa confided to Catherine as they watched Emily show William her collection of fairy tale books, wasn't the money, as awful as that was. It was watching her try to be brave for us. She would pretend the chemotherapy didn't hurt, or that she wasn't scared because she could see how worried we were. Catherine nodded, thinking of her own children and how she would feel in Lisa's place. She's remarkable. You both are. She's everything to us, David said, joining their conversation. When the doctors first told us about the leukemia, I thought the world had ended. But Emily, she just looked at them and asked if she would still be able to go to school when she got better. Not if she would get better. When she would get better. By late afternoon, the practical arrangements had been made. The mortgage payment would be transferred on Monday morning, with enough additional funds to cover all medical expenses and living costs for at least a year. David had contacts in the construction industry who had been promising him work once a major development project began. With stable income assured, he could wait for the right opportunity rather than accepting whatever was available. But more than the financial relief, something else had happened in that small sitting room in Wythenshawe. Two families had connected across a gulf of privilege and circumstance, finding common ground in love for their children and hope for the future. As William and Catherine prepared to leave, Emily suddenly threw her arms around Catherine's waist. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for making the wish come true." Catherine knelt to Emily's level, smoothing the little girl's pink hat. "You made the wish come true, Emily. Your courage, your hope, your belief that good things could happen. That's what magic really is." Emily considered this seriously. "Will you come back to visit?" "Would you like us to?" "Yes, please. And when I'm all better, maybe you can meet my friends. They're not going to believe that I know a real princess." Catherine laughed. "It's a deal." The drive back to London was quiet. Both William and Catherine lost in their own thoughts. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. They had entered uncharted territory that day, stepping outside the boundaries of their official roles to simply be people helping other people. "No regrets?" William asked as they reached the outskirts of London. Catherine looked at him, thinking of Emily's bright eyes and Lisa's tears of relief and David's dignity in accepting help he had never expected to receive. "None at all. You?" "I feel like we did something that actually mattered today, not just performed a duty or fulfilled an obligation, but really made a difference." "The beginning of a different kind of service," Catherine mused. "I think so. I think this is what we're meant to do." As they pulled into the palace gates, both of them were already thinking about the Henderson family settling into their first night of security in months, and about Emily falling asleep without the weight of her parents' fears pressing down on their small house on Maple Avenue. They had no way of knowing that their quiet act of kindness would soon ripple outward in ways they could never have imagined, touching hearts and changing lives far beyond one small family in Manchester. 3 months had passed since that October afternoon in Manchester, and winter had settled over England with its familiar gray skies and early darkness. The Henderson family had fallen into a new rhythm of hope and healing. Emily's latest scans showed continued improvement. Her hair was growing back in soft brown curls, and she had returned to school part-time. David had started a new job with a construction firm, and Lisa was planning to return to teaching in the autumn. William and Catherine had visited twice more, always quietly, always without fanfare. They had brought books for Emily, played board games around the Henderson family's kitchen table, and shared countless cups of tea while Emily napped or worked on homework. Their children had even met via video call, with George, Charlotte, and Louis giggling with Emily over silly jokes and shared stories. It was during their third visit that everything changed. They were leaving the Henderson house on a Sunday afternoon, saying their goodbyes at the front door, when an elderly woman from across the street approached them. Mrs. Agnes Whitmore was 83, a widow who had lived on Maple Avenue for over 50 years. Her sharp eyes had been watching the mysterious visitors to number 43 with growing curiosity. "Excuse me," she called out, walking slowly but determinedly across the street. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but you look very familiar." Catherine and William exchanged glances. They had been careful, but they had also become comfortable with the Henderson family and perhaps less vigilant about their surroundings. Mrs. Whitmore stopped in front of them, studying their faces carefully. "You're them, aren't you? The Prince and Princess of Wales?" It wasn't really a question. William opened his mouth to deflect, but Mrs. Whitmore continued. "I've been watching you visit the Hendersons for months. I know it's none of my business, but that little girl has been through so much, and her parents, well, they've been beside themselves with worry." She paused, her voice softening. "But something changed after your first visit. Lisa started smiling again. David stopped looking like he carried the weight of the world. And Emily, that child has been glowing with happiness." Catherine looked at this elderly woman who had spent months quietly observing, quietly caring about her neighbor's welfare. "Mrs. Whitmore, we would appreciate your discretion about this. The family values their privacy." "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Whitmore said with a knowing smile, "I've kept bigger secrets than this. But I want you to know that what you've done for that family, it's given the whole street hope. We've all been worried about the Hendersons. Good people don't deserve to suffer like they have." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a handwritten letter. "I wrote this for you weeks ago, but I never had the courage to deliver it. I want to thank you, not as subjects to royalty, but as one neighbor thanking another for caring about someone in need." That evening, back at Kensington Palace, William and Catherine sat in their study reading Mrs. Whitmore's letter. It was written in careful cursive on flower-patterned stationery, the words of someone who had lived long enough to understand the difference between duty and compassion. "Your Royal Highnesses," the letter began, "I hope you will forgive an old woman's presumption in writing to you, but I felt I must tell you what your kindness has meant to our little community. In 53 years on Maple Avenue, I have watched families come and go, children grow up, neighbors help neighbors through good times and bad, but I have never seen anything like what you have done for the Henderson family. You could have sent money through official channels. You could have arranged a hospital visit or a photo opportunity. Instead, you came to their home, sat at their kitchen table, and treated them like family. You gave them not just financial help, but dignity. You gave Emily not just a chance to meet a princess, but the feeling that she was worthy of being truly seen and cared for. I know the newspapers write about royal duties and charitable work, but what I witnessed was different. This was two parents helping other parents, two people using their good fortune to lift up others in their time of need. This is what I always hoped royalty could be. Not distant figures in grand palaces, but real people who understand that their privilege means nothing unless it serves something greater than themselves. I will never speak of what I have seen to anyone who might cause problems for you or the Henderson family. But I needed you to know that your quiet kindness has touched more hearts than just Emily's. The whole street feels different now, more hopeful, more connected. When people see that even those at the highest levels of society can act with such simple human decency, it reminds us all to be better neighbors, better people. Thank you for showing us what true service looks like. The letter was signed simply, "A Grateful Neighbor." Agnes Whitmore. She's remarkable, Catherine said softly, folding the letter carefully. She reminds me of your grandmother, William replied. That same quality of seeing straight to the heart of things. They sat in comfortable silence, both thinking about the unexpected consequences of their decision to help the Henderson family. What had begun as a simple act of compassion had become something larger, a reminder of what was possible when people chose to see each other as human beings first. 2 weeks later, their carefully maintained secret began to unravel in the most unexpected way. Emily Henderson had become something of a celebrity at her school. Not because anyone knew about the royal visits, but because her recovery had been so remarkable and her spirit so bright that she inspired everyone around her. Her teacher, Miss Sarah Collins, had assigned her class to write essays about their heroes, and Emily had chosen to write about the princess who keeps promises. The essay was so moving that Miss Collins submitted it to a regional writing contest without thinking about the implications. Emily's piece won first place in her age category, and the local Manchester Evening News requested an interview with the young winner. During the interview, Emily spoke eloquently about courage and kindness, about how sometimes the most important magic was when people helped each other. When the reporter asked about her essay's inspiration, Emily simply said that she had learned about real princesses, ones who didn't just live in castles, but came to your house for tea and remembered your birthday and kept their promises about visiting again. The story ran as a small human interest piece on page 6 of the Manchester Evening News, with the headline, "Local Girl's Recovery Inspires Award-Winning Essay." It might have remained a purely local story, except that Agnes Whitmore's great-nephew worked for the BBC in London and happened to see the article when visiting his aunt. James Whitmore was an experienced journalist who immediately recognized the potential implications of Emily's innocent words. But more than that, he was Agnes Whitmore's family, raised on her stories about the importance of kindness and community. When his aunt quietly confirmed what she had observed, James faced a decision that would define his career and his character. He could break the story that would make headlines worldwide, the future king and queen secretly helping an ordinary family in crisis. Or he could find a way to tell the story that honored everyone involved while protecting their privacy. James chose the latter path. He approached William and Catherine through official channels, requesting a meeting to discuss a story of national interest involving your royal highnesses. When they met at Kensington Palace, he was direct about what he knew and what he intended to do. "I want to tell this story," he said simply, "but I want to tell it right, with your cooperation and the Henderson family's consent, because I think people need to hear it." "Why?" Catherine asked. "Because in a world that often feels divided and cynical, this story reminds us of what we can be at our best. Because your decision to help one family has actually helped dozens of people. The Hendersons' neighbors have started helping each other more. Emily's classmates have raised money for children's charities, and my aunt says the whole community feels different now." James paused, choosing his words carefully. "But mostly because Emily Henderson is going to make a full recovery, and in 10 years when she's 17 and strong and healthy, she's going to want people to know that fairy tales can come true, not because of magic, but because people chose to care." The story broke on a quiet Tuesday evening in February. James Whitmore's carefully crafted piece ran simultaneously online and in print with the headline, "The Princess Promise: How a Royal Act of Kindness Changed One Family's Life." The article told Emily's story with dignity and grace, focusing on her courage and her family's strength. It revealed the royal couple's involvement not as a sensation, but as a natural expression of their values. Most importantly, it included statements from the Henderson family expressing their gratitude and their hope that their story might inspire others to help their neighbors in whatever ways they could. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Dark Princess Promise was trending on social media. But rather than the usual mix of adulation and criticism that greeted royal stories, the response was remarkably unified. People shared their own stories of quiet kindness, of neighbors helping neighbors, of small acts that made enormous differences. The Henderson family's local hospital received donations totaling over $100,000 in the first week, earmarked for families facing financial hardship during medical crises. Schools across the country started Emily's Hope projects, with children writing to other children facing serious illnesses. Local communities organized help networks for families in crisis, inspired by the idea that everyone deserved to have neighbors who cared. More significantly, the story changed the conversation about modern monarchy. For years, debates had raged about the relevance of royal institutions, their cost to taxpayers, their distance from ordinary people's lives. Emily's story offered a different perspective, not about grand ceremonies or constitutional roles, but about the simple power of using privilege to serve others. Letters poured into Kensington Palace from around the world. Many came from families facing similar struggles, thanking William and Catherine not just for helping the Hendersons, but for showing that anyone could make a difference in someone else's life. Others came from people who had been inspired to help their own neighbors, to volunteer at local charities, to look for ways to use whatever advantages they had to lift others up. One letter came from a family in Scotland whose young son was battling the same form of leukemia as Emily. They didn't ask for money or assistance. They simply wanted to thank William and Catherine for showing their son that brave children who fought hard could have happy endings. Another came from a group of teenagers in Wales who had organized a fundraising campaign for homeless families in their community, inspired by Emily's essay about real princesses being people who helped others. The most moving letter came from Agnes Whitmore herself, who wrote to thank them for proving that kindness was contagious, that one good act could inspire countless others. "You helped one little girl," she wrote, "but you reminded all of us why we should care about each other. In a world that often feels cold and divided, you showed us that warmth and connection are still possible. You didn't just save the Henderson family. You reminded the rest of us what it means to be human." 6 months after James Whitmore's article appeared, William and Catherine returned to Manchester for an official visit to the Children's Hospital, where Emily had received her treatment. But before the formal ceremonies and photo opportunities, they made one more private visit to Maple Avenue. Emily met them at the door, her hair now shoulder-length and shining, her face bright with health and happiness. She was wearing a dress she had chosen especially for the occasion, not pink this time, but deep blue with tiny silver stars. "I'm wearing the wishing star dress," she announced proudly, twirling to show off the sparkles, "because all my wishes came true." They sat around the Henderson family's kitchen table one more time, drinking tea and sharing stories about the months that had passed. Emily showed them her latest school reports. She was excelling in all her subjects and had been chosen to represent her class in a regional writing competition. David had been promoted to site supervisor at his construction company. Lisa was halfway through a refresher course that would allow her to return to teaching in September. The house on Maple Avenue was filled with laughter and plans for the future. But perhaps more importantly, the Hendersons had become focal points for community support in ways they had never expected. David volunteered with an organization helping displaced factory workers find new employment. Lisa had started a support group for parents of children with serious illnesses. Emily regularly visited other young patients at the hospital, bringing artwork and stories and the infectious optimism that had carried her through her own ordeal. "We learned something from you," Lisa told Catherine as they sat in the garden, watching Emily play with the family's new puppy, a golden retriever named Hope. "We learned that when good things happen to you, you're supposed to pass them on." "You learned that all by yourselves," Catherine replied. "We just gave you the chance to show it." As William and Catherine prepared to leave Maple Avenue for what they knew might be the last time as private visitors, Emily ran up to Catherine with a new drawing. This one showed the house on Maple Avenue, but now it was surrounded by dozens of other houses, with families standing in front of each one. Above them all, the sky was filled with bright stars. "It's the whole neighborhood," Emily explained. "Mrs. Whitmore says everyone is happier now because they know that people care about each other, and all the stars are wishing stars because wishes can come true if people help make them happen." That evening, as they drove back to London through the gathering dusk, William and Catherine reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple letter from a social worker and had somehow grown into a national conversation about kindness, community, and the power of ordinary people to change each other's lives. "Do you think we did the right thing?" William asked. "All of it, the help, the publicity, the way it all played out?" Catherine looked out at the countryside passing by, thinking about Emily's bright smile and Lisa's tears of gratitude and David's quiet dignity. She thought about Agnes Whitmore's letter and the hundreds of others like it. She thought about the children in hospitals across the country who now had pen pals their own age and the communities that had started helping their neighbors in new ways. "I think," she said finally, "that Emily Henderson is going to grow up in a world that's a little bit kinder because of what happened. And I think that's worth everything. Even if it changes how people see us, even if it sets expectations we might not always be able to meet." Catherine smiled. "Especially then. Because if people expect us to care about them, to see them as human beings worthy of help and dignity, then we'll have to keep being worthy of those expectations." As they reached the outskirts of London, both of them were thinking about the future they wanted to build, not just for their own children, but for all the Emily Hendersons of the world. They had learned something profound in that small house on Maple Avenue, that the greatest privilege of their position was not the ceremony or the deference, but the simple power to change lives through acts of basic human kindness. Behind them, in Manchester, Emily Henderson was falling asleep in her own bed, in her own room, surrounded by her drawings and her books and her dreams of the future. Above her house, the stars were shining brightly in the clear winter sky. And somewhere among them was the wishing star that had brought a princess to her door and taught a nation what it truly meant to care for one another. The quiet act of kindness that had begun with one family's crisis had rippled outward in ways that none of them could have imagined, touching hearts across a country and reminding everyone who heard the story that sometimes the most powerful magic was simply choosing to love your neighbor as yourself.